Well, here to discuss the implications of the president's trip, Michael O'Hanlon, Director of Research and Foreign Policy at the Brookings Institution. Michael, it's great to have you at Faith Nation again. Let's start with President Xi's and Trump's confirmed their trade framework. It included delaying a ban on some Chinese companies from getting U.S. technology and, of course, on fentanyl. They plan to meet again next year. What do you see as the biggest takeaway?
Greetings. Well, this is, I think, relatively good news in what remains a very difficult economic and strategic relationship. But the good news is that both Xi Jinping and Donald Trump want to make sure things don't get too bad, or at least they seem to have achieved that this week. And one can only hope and pray that continues. Obviously, both sides are retaining their leverage over the other, the United States largely with tariffs, but also restrictions on things like advanced semiconductor production machinery, and China with things like rare earth mineral magnets and other commodities and technologies that we depend on them for. And neither side is saying that they're going to stop using these kinds of leverage in the future. As you point out, there's a truce, there's an interim agreement, but at least things haven't fallen completely apart.
So the president also told reporters China's President Xi wants to help end Russia's war with Ukraine. If that's the case, what can China do to show that they're really working towards peace between the two countries?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because I have no doubt China would prefer this war to end. I don't think China sees a benefit in the war, but I do think that they are willing to help Vladimir Putin and Russia with their broader economy and even with technology that's relevant to production of military equipment. China has heeded the American request going back to the Biden administration not to send finished weapons to Russia. So they're doing what we asked there, but they're sending machinery that Russia can then put together in factories and build its own weapons. So that's one big area where China could certainly intensify the pressure. And they also could certainly reduce their imports of Russian oil and gas. Those are the two big areas, perhaps. But I don't expect Xi Jinping to do that, because he wants to stay friends with Vladimir Putin, and they see some degree of common cause in pushing back against the United States. So I can be hopeful, but I'm not very optimistic.
You know, some consider the president's timing, the announcing of the restart of nuclear testing right before meeting with Xi, as maybe a deterrent. Others worry that China might take this as a green light to spur an arms race. What are your thoughts here?
My thoughts are that President Trump's statement here was a bit confusing and maybe even, if I could say so, partly misinformed, because neither China nor Russia has conducted nuclear tests in the sense that we use that term commonly. In other words, an actual nuclear detonation. Neither one has carried that out. The only country on earth that has detonated nuclear weapons this century is North Korea. What China is doing is building up its nuclear forces. They're making more weapons, but they're not testing them. Now, that's still reason for concern, of course, but it's not the same thing. And Russia is testing new kinds of delivery vehicles, not the bombs themselves. So again, not a happy development for the United States, but also not necessarily one that should lead to a U.S. nuclear test. So I think the president, he's going to have to reassess just what he means by this proposal.
What do you think he was trying to get at?
I think he might have been misinformed by his advisors. They might have confused. He had a long trip. I was just in Asia this week. I'm younger than the president, and I'm tired. He did a lot of stuff. He did a lot more than I did this week, and he may have simply failed to note the distinction between a new kind of nuclear weapons delivery vehicle and an actual bomb test.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I like the age reference there. Switching gears real quickly to Israel. Wednesday marked the deadliest day since the ceasefire began. And even after the Trump administration had been sending waves of U.S. officials to try to keep that deal intact. Michael, how fragile is this agreement? And can you talk about how other nations may play a part in trying to keep the peace?
Well, it's super fragile, although it's an amazing development. And I give President Trump, about whom I was just a little critical a minute ago, I give him a lot of credit for what he's imposed through his energy and through taking advantage of good new circumstances with the ceasefire. But the idea that it is going to magically turn into an enduring peace is still a long shot. And it's not going to happen magically. It's going to require, as you say, other countries, especially Arab peacekeeping forces and other Muslim majority nation countries like Indonesia, perhaps, to send in forces that are more than just, monitoring ceasefire lines, but are capable of using military force against Hamas if necessary. We're a long ways away from this thing being over. And we also need a vision for a Palestinian state.
Just a few seconds left. Any concerns about Turkey being a part of that peacekeeping force?
I would welcome it. I think Turkey is an American ally, and even though I don't love its leader right now, there's a lot of capability in the Turkish military.
All right, we're going to have to let that be the final word. Michael O'Hanlon, Director of Research and Foreign Policy at the Brookings Institution. Michael, we always appreciate your time and your insights.
Thank you kindly.